Good day and welcome to everyone joining us. And welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Advancing Obesity Clinical Development, Emerging Strategies for Next-Gen Trials. My name is Aisha Rashid and I'll be your X Talks host for today. At this point, I'd like to thank MedPace who developed the content for this presentation. MedPace is a scientifically driven, global, full-service clinical contract research organization providing phase 1 to 4 clinical development services to the biotechnology, pharmaceutical, and medical device industries. Supported by wholly owned central laboratories, Bioanalytical Lab, Imaging Core Lab, ECG Core Lab, and Phase 1 unit, MedPace's mission is to accelerate the global development of safe and effective medical therapeutics through its high science and disciplined operating approach that leverages local regulatory and deep therapeutic expertise across all major areas. And now it's a pleasure for me to introduce our speakers for today's event. Dr. Philippa Miranda has more than 17 years of CRO experience conducting clinical research studies. Her therapeutic expertise covers a wide range of metabolic indications with significant medical monitoring experience in the areas of obesity, MASH, type 1, and type 2 diabetes. Dr. Miranda received her MD from Duke University School of Medicine and completed her residency in internal medicine and her fellowship in endocrinology at Duke as well. She served on the faculty in the Division of Endocrinology at Duke University Health System for 5 years prior to transitioning to industry in 2008. Dr. Miranda is board certified in endocrinology, diabetes, and metabolism. Dr. Douglas Lee has over 25 years of experience in clinical medicine and drug development, with specialized expertise in endocrinology, metabolism, and liver diseases. Prior to joining MedPace, he served as Global Senior Medical Director at a major pharmaceutical company, where he led the design and oversight of global development programs in diabetes and obesity, and guided regulatory approvals for 3 diabetes products in Europe. Dr. Lee is a member of the Royal College of Physicians and the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine in the UK and serves as a clinical reviewer for the Journal of Diabetes, Obesity, and Metabolism. Dr. Salvatore Zabatino has over 30 years of experience in pharmaceutical and device clinical research. He has been a part of the MedPace leadership team since its founding in 1992 and has held leadership roles across a number of functional areas, including clinical operations, regulatory, medical writing, biometrics, data management, IT, imaging, and cardiovascular services. His focus is on integrating and optimizing the clinical, operational, and technical aspects needed to conduct global studies across multiple therapeutic indications. Dr. Zabatino has extensive experience with imaging and other biomarkers of drug and device safety and efficacy in clinical trials, including DEXA, CMRI, echo, cardiac SPECT, ultrasound, MR, CT, endoscopy, photography, ECG, Holter, ABPM, and connected devices. And finally, Andy Hood brings over 13 years of clinical research experience, including more than 6 years dedicated to obesity and weight management trials. As Obesity Therapeutic Group Lead at MedPace, he has managed global phase 1 to 3 obesity studies, successfully guiding the execution of complex trials and building strong collaborations with metabolic key opinion leaders and research centers worldwide. And now, without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic to our wonderful panelists today. So you may begin when ready.
Thanks, Aisha. So hello, everybody. As Aisha mentioned, I'm Philippa Miranda, and on behalf of the MedPace team, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar in which we're going to discuss advancing obesity clinical development. So our team is very excited to discuss this rapidly progressing field with you today. And we're going to open today's meeting with some information on the obesity landscape and emerging strategies. And then we will move into a discussion of evolving clinical trial designs. So in order to really set the stage for today's discussion, we thought it would be useful to start with a brief review of some of the goals of weight management therapies. It's always really important that we keep in mind what patients and healthcare providers are trying to achieve in addressing obesity. We've broken that down into kind of 4 different categories here. And really, as everybody knows, the first goal of weight management is really to achieve an adequate amount of weight loss, as shown in the upper left panel. The initial targets have traditionally been about 5 to 10% weight loss. But I think now with the success of many GLP-1 based therapies, often we see people aiming to achieve a higher goal of weight loss of maybe more than 15 or 20% weight loss. But given the success that we have seen in recent years in people being able to achieve their weight reduction goals, we also have seen a bigger focus and allowing us to really think beyond just that number on the scale and really being able to focus on the other 3 areas outlined on this slide. So being able to focus on improving health status, minimizing adverse effects of current therapies, and really trying to achieve long-term sustainability of weight loss. So in terms of improving health status, we know that patients really want to be able to feel better when they lose weight, and patients and physicians want to be able to see improvements in comorbid conditions and physical function. That's really important, and that's something that we see focused on more in trials these days. We also know that adverse effects are important to subjects, and anything that we can do to maximize tolerability is also very important. And then finally, I think a key piece that becomes more important for people long-term is really that lifelong management, because we all know that that remains necessary to maintain weight loss, and we really want to make sure that weight loss is sustainable and we have a durable effect for our patients. So in order to kind of see where this is going, we'll take a little bit of a look now into where we are with current obesity therapies and the landscape.
Thanks, Dr. Miranda. Yeah, I think, we saw for a long time really a focus on the first bucket, that the reducing the overall weight, working for that specific initial therapeutic target. What can we do to get these patients down initially? And there was a lot of focus and a lot of activity within that space. And we've seen the GLP-1 based therapies really kind of explode onto the scene in the last 5 years or so. And this graph here is just showing you the percentage of patients within the US that have prescriptions for GLP-1s. As you can see, in 2019, 2020, that number was about 1% of the US population. And it really started to explode and go all the way up to 4% by 2024. We see that split out amongst the different GLP-based therapies, but just overall with that yellow bar, just seeing the interest and the usage of that from a prescription perspective. And that's backed again by Medicaid prescriptions, which we've seen grow over 400% between 2019 and 2023. And some of this was tampered a little bit by supply, as well as costing or insurance abilities to cover these, this and specifically in weight loss. But that has eased over the last year or 2 years or so. And so we do see projections now that over 9% of the total US population may be using a GLP-1 or be prescribed to a GLP-1 by 2030. And we do see, we did see kind of the support for that with that 38% increase specifically between 2022 and 2024. And so as the availability of these drugs becomes a little bit easier, it's more available to the patients, the costing or the insurance providers are able to help with that, will help kind of ease things, but also it's just showing a therapeutic benefit. And so they've really hit that first bucket where we were focusing all of that power and that trial activity, so that now we're seeing kind of a change in the landscape, and I think that's what we want to majorly talk about today. So if we go to the next slide here, you can see that landscape. So in 2020 or so, we had 164 trials, and that's just overall obesity trials that we were looking at. And of that group, only 36% of them were in the GLP-1 space. So 36 total trials were in the GLP-1 space. So not a huge amount. We did see that number really start to take off. So with this blue line here on the top, you see a fourfold increase between 2020 and 2025 or 2024, and expecting that to continue. We haven't seen that crest quite yet, so we continue to see even more trials in this space. And then interestingly, if you look at the other two areas here, like what's causing that growth, where are those trials happening at? And it's not just your kind of classical monotherapy versus placebo. Are we seeing weight loss to hit that first bucket that Dr. Miranda talked about? We're seeing more creative solutions, more creative study designs to try to address those other three areas. Maybe you've hit your initial weight loss goal. What are you doing at that point? Are you switching to a different maintenance drug? Or what if I combine my drug with a GLP-1 based agent? So you can see that kind of happening here with the combination therapies. There were only 27 of those in 2020. And we see that number really expanding up to 127 and continuing to grow on that gray line. And then you do see still that background therapy, that GLP-1 based therapy really driving the overall amount of trials in the space. That number has increased sixfold over the lifetime, since 2020. So again, using that as kind of your background or your initial launching point where we were focused for so many years, and now trying to change the game, find ways to better help our patients, improve in those other three areas has really been kind of the game changer and the major shift that we have seen in the landscape overall. And that has led to different creative and maybe more complicated study designs than we saw in the years past.
As Andy was just saying, we have seen that big uptick in use of GLP-1s over the last several years, as well as that accelerated growth in obesity trials. And that includes both trials with GLP-1 components as well as combination studies. And what we really have tried to explore is how does this evolving landscape and environment in terms of obesity therapies and trials, how does this impact design of new trials? It is important to note, historically, as Andy also mentioned, majority of weight loss studies have been trials of study drugs versus placebo. And we do recognize that those studies do remain a core component of drug development in this indication, but we are seeing increases in these other types of trial designs. And the two main categories that we're going to talk about today are study designs that include a switch design or a combination therapy design. We do see that switch design studies are really helping to take advantage of the growing group of people who are taking a GLP-1. And these types of studies do allow us to study things like maintenance or potentially optimizing therapeutic regimens with things like different dosing frequencies. They also allow to look at comparisons for better tolerability and long-term maintenance. In terms of the combination therapy design studies, these are also increasing due to the success of GLP-1 based therapies. And these types of studies often aim to look at ways that we may be able to improve efficacy while minimizing side effects of existing therapies. And I think one key category within this larger umbrella of combination design is really the combination studies that focus on lean mass preservation and allowing us to address really the quality of weight loss, including measures of overall body composition. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Dr. Douglas Lee, to discuss this type of study in more detail.
Thank you, Philippa. So now I shall be talking about really what's driving this increase in lean mass preservation studies. And my slide really is on obesity, sarcopenia, and sarcopenic obesity. So if you focus on the left-hand side, you can see really this is from prescription data from the US population really for GLP-1 analogs. And you can really see from this graph really that which particular age group are being prescribed GLP-1 analogs really. So you can see the maximum group really is the age group between 45 and 54 years really. And then the second most common group is then 55 to 64. And you can also see that the more than 65-year age groups also being prescribed GLP-1s really. So this is a very, very important data with related to prescription of GLP-1. And it's really in keeping with MedPace experience in running these obesity trials. Often our mean age for these obesity trials are somewhere between 45 to 50 years. And this is also in keeping with the large phase 3 trials with that kind of rough mean age really. So really important point, the second point really is that age-related loss of muscle mass really can begin quite early really for someone in their 40s. And then after the age of 50, muscle mass decreases at an annual rate of 1 to 2% per year really. So what can then happen over time is that people can develop sarcopenia, which is a combination really of muscle loss, plus also loss in physical function essentially. And then the combination of sarcopenia and obesity is then known as sarcopenic obesity. So there have been concerns about the potential impact of GLP-1 receptor agonists on sarcopenia, especially in high-risk patient populations. Towards the right-hand side, the bottom, you can see this graph really. This was a study done on the prevalence of sarcopenia in amongst the elderly. So this was age more than 55 amongst the different populations. So you can see that in US, the prevalence of sarcopenia in the elderly is quite common really. It's almost 10%. Whereas in Japan, where you have more aging populations, the prevalence is higher, around the 20% mark really. Okay, and then the next slide here really. This is really a summary of the muscle preservation trials really. This slide is aimed to provide really a broad overview of recent studies in muscle preservation, really highlighting the wide variety in study design, and also differing clinical development strategies that pharma companies are using to develop these products really. So in terms of the studies, I shall be highlighting these three companies and 3 trials. So first of all, I have the Scholar Rock study. So this was the phase 2 Embrace trial in which they had 102 patients. The study drug was apitegromab, which is a myostatin inhibitor, and they added this on to tirzepatide. The study duration was 24 weeks, and really like to highlight, the strategy that Scholar Rock used. They really included quite a broad patient population. So patients who were between the age of 18 years and less than 65 years who were overweight or obese. The study was very successful in showing the weight loss. So essentially, there was a similar weight loss in the apitegromab group plus tirzepatide, minus 12.3% weight loss at week 24, versus the tirzepatide plus placebo, so it was minus 13.4%. Very importantly, the study did show preservation of lean mass. So there was 14.6% of total mass loss was in the apitegromab plus tirzepatide group versus 30.2% for the tirzepatide plus placebo group really. So you can see from these results in terms of lean mass really that the use of this myostatin inhibitor really preserved the lean mass by roughly about 15%. So, my view is that this particular study was really highly successful, really. And then I shall go on to my next study, really. That was the Veru study. And you can see a totally different clinical development strategy utilized by Veru. So this was the phase 2b quality trial with 168 patients. They had essentially the study drug was enobosarm, either 3 or 6 milligrams. And enobosarm is a selective androgen receptor modulator, a SARM, and they added this on to semaglutide in the study. The study was slightly shorter duration. It was 16 weeks. And you can see here in terms of the patient population, they were really selecting a different patient population compared to Scholar Rock, really. So they were focusing on patients who were more than 60 years of age, who were overweight or obese, who were already on semaglutide. So you can see the strategy is very different. And, based on my other slides that, one would really clearly anticipate that patients, over the age of 60, they would have really, over the years, lost a lot of their lean mass already. So you can see then later in my discussion on the assessments that, what they tried to do is then capitalize on this particular patient population, really. So in terms of weight loss, enobosarm plus semaglutide showed minus 4.4 kilogram weight loss, and which was really a similar mean weight loss at week 16 versus the semaglutide plus placebo group, which was minus 4.7 kilograms. They were also able to show preservation of lean mass. So here they saw 9.4% of total mass loss was the lean mass was in the lean mass versus in the enobosarm plus semaglutide. 9.4% of total mass loss was lean mass in the enobosarm plus semaglutide group, really, versus 31.9% for the semaglutide plus placebo. So you can really see that the addition of enobosarm was really able to preserve roughly about 20% of lean mass really loss. So my view is that this study was also highly successful. In addition to these benefits seen in the quality trial, they were also able to show preserved physical function. So the proportion of patients who lost more than 10% of stair climb power from baseline was significantly lower in the enobosarm plus semaglutide arm, really. So 19.4% versus semaglutide plus placebo, 42.6%. So again, very successful in demonstrating preservation of physical function. Now I shall go to my third study. This is the Rivers study. It was a phase 2A study called the Humane trial with 66 subjects. And the study drug was HU6, which is a controlled metabolic accelerator, versus placebo. It's a 19-week trial. Patients were more than 40 years of age. And this patient population, one can see that Rivers really focused on a very specific population. So they really enrolled patients who had obesity-related preserved ejection fraction heart failure. So, you can see from each of these studies where, Scholar Rock really, casted quite a broad net, very focused down on patients more than 60 years. And then finally, Rivers really focused down to a very specific obese patient population. So in the Rivers study, HU6 demonstrated significant weight loss from baseline. So they saw minus 6.8 pounds and significant weight loss versus placebo. and this was highly statistically significant at week 19. They were also able to show preservation of lean mass. So there was significant reduction in fat mass from baseline in HU6 with no significant change in lean body mass in this study. There were some physical function and biomarkers assessed in this study. However, when reading the publication, the manuscript related to this study, they do mention that the study was not powered to detect these particular changes. So one notes that there was no statistically significant changes in peak VO2, 6-minute walk test, the Kansas City cardiomyopathy questionnaire, high sensitivity CRP, and the NT-proBNP or diastolic function. So in summary, really, really successful 3 studies. And now I shall go on to my case study. Again, really trying to focus in on the more minor details for this kind of study. So now I'll be discussing about the Eli Lilly Believe phase 2 trial, really. So this involves the study drug bimagrumab. So bimagrumab is a monoclonal antibody of the activin type 2 receptors, which actually blocks both activin and also myostatin signaling. So it really blocks the 2 particular pathways. So in this particular study, there were 507 participants who received semaglutide once weekly via subcutaneous injection alone or in combination with bimagrumab or bimagrumab alone. Patients were recruited across 26 sites in US, Australia, and New Zealand. There was a 48-week main treatment period with a 32-week open label extension. Patients were randomized to 9 treatment arms with 3 broad patient groups as follows. So there was bimagrumab only, so bimagrumab placebo, bimagrumab 10 milligram per kilogram, bimagrumab 30 milligram per kilogram. There was a semaglutide only, placebo plus semaglutide 1 milligram, placebo plus semaglutide 1.7 milligram, and placebo plus semaglutide 2.4 milligrams. And then there was the bimagrumab plus semaglutide, so bimagrumab 10 milligram per kilogram plus semaglutide 1 milligram, bimagrumab 10 milligram per kilogram plus semaglutide 1.7 milligram, and finally bimagrumab 10 milligram per kilogram plus semaglutide 2.4 milligrams. Bimagrumab IV infusions were given at weeks 4, 16, 28, and 40. In terms of the key eligibility criteria, so what we can see here is that, Eli Lilly were again kind of casting a very broad net in their study, really. So they were quite similar then to the Scholar Rock study, and they were also following the path of other studies such as the Regeneron Courage study. So they recruited basically patients from a broad age range between the age of 18 to 80 years. BMI was more than 30 or BMI more than 27 with 1 or more obesity-associated comorbidity. They did exclude patients with diabetes with a HbA1c of more than 6.5%. The primary endpoint was a change in body weight from baseline, and the secondary endpoints were change in total body fat mass, lean mass, waist circumference, and visceral adipose tissues. They utilized DEXA to assess body composition and visceral and subcutaneous adipose tissue, the VAT and the SAT. Okay, so these are the results of the Eli Lilly Believe study. So again, really demonstrating a very successful study design and positive study results, really. So very impressive results in terms of the combination therapy with bimagrumab and semaglutide, in which they were able to demonstrate really an additive effect in terms of the weight loss of 22.1% in the combination therapy group. Whereas in the semaglutide group, it was 15.7% weight loss, and the bimagrumab only group, it was 10.8%. in terms of the total weight loss from fat mass as visualized with DEXA, combination therapy was 92.8% of weight loss coming from the fat mass. And this was actually quite close to the bimagrumab arm, which showed 100% of total weight loss coming from the fat mass, versus 71.8% of total weight loss coming from the fat mass in the semaglutide arm, really. So, my view is that this study was very successful in demonstrating preservation of lean mass, really. So in the semaglutide arm, roughly, 71.8% of total weight loss came from fat mass, whereas they were able to increase this to above 90% in combination therapy and 100% in the bimagrumab arm. Of note, actually, in the bimagrumab arm, there was actually a minor increase. So there was a 2.5% increase in total lean mass in the bimagrumab alone group. In addition to these really positive results, Lilly were also able to show an improvement in the SF-36, which is really a questionnaire that covers both physical function, mental, and also general well-being as a part of the domains for the SF-36, really. So they were able to show improvements, statistically significant improvements in SF-36 from baseline in the bimagrumab 30 milligram per kilogram with semaglutide 2.4 milligram versus the semaglutide 2.4 milligram alone group. The findings were consistent with the known safety profiles of the two drugs with no new safety concerns. I would like to end my my discussion also really raising an interesting point that Lilly did make a recent announcement that they were terminating their phase 2 trial with bimagrumab tirzepatide in their obese, overweight, type 2 diabetes study as a strategic decision, really, and that they were continuing their bimagrumab tirzepatide study in obese patients. So very interesting, this recent announcement that came from Eli Lilly. With that, I would like to pass on to Sal now to talk about imaging options for these kind of lean mass preservation studies.
Thanks, Douglas. So as we've heard both from Douglas as well as from Philippa, loss in weight is it's not just the numbers that count, but where are those numbers coming from? And it's nice to see that DEXA is still being used. We've been supporting DEXA in obesity studies for over 2 decades now, and it's a great tool. Low radiation exposure, very easy to get patients scheduled. You can segment the body so that you can see all different regions, as well as break out into the fat, lean mass, and bone mass. You can get SAT and VAT measurements, as well as those android and gynoid. So you can kind of see where your changes in weight and the distribution is really impacting more in these different studies. You can also get a general sense of what's going on in terms of bone density for some of those different compounds that may be developed out there. Clearly, it's not the choice for BMD, but again, you can use the DEXA bone mineral density methodologies of spine and hip to get better detail on that. But for body composition, DEXA is a great tool. The other nice thing about the DEXA is with a lot of these obese patients, they end up getting quite large, and sometimes it can become challenging to get them into some of the other imaging modalities like MRI, which we can talk about in a few moments. In the DEXA space, if you do have a patient that's a little bit too large to fit in the field of view, you can do this offset imaging where you shift them over to one side and then use this reflection measurements to help accommodate those changes and still be able to get reliable measurements from that. As I mentioned, the other imaging modalities, as we move on, we've recently seen some interest from some of our clients looking at possibly using MRI. And MRI is a wonderful tool. We certainly have a lot of use for it in a couple of other indications. The challenges that we see here, however, are, as I mentioned before, the size of these patients sometimes can be a bit on pushing the limits of what these scanners can do. We've got the challenges that some of these patients, as we get older, we've got hardware, knee replacements, hip replacements. We may have pacemakers and things like that, which may be contraindicated for the MRI. Also, as they get too large, you start seeing, and as you can see in the images there, cutting off certain body regions, and you don't have that flexibility here in terms of being able to shift the patient off to the side like we do with the DEXA. Other thing is cost and scheduling time on those scanners for being able to do that. So it does take a bit of time to get a full body scan for those patients that can fit in there. You can always consider it as a sub-study to help supplement the results that you're getting with the DEXA. But again, looking at your patient population, it may impact what your benefits are in using that MRI. Andy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think other than just the patients, because the patient piece is super important, but also the sites operationally, right? So if they have access to, you may want a certain site or a certain demographic or a certain region that you're targeting, and access to an MRI center in that specific area, specifically globally, may be challenging. And so one of the things we'll talk to with our clients as we're kind of designing their trials and how they want to go forward is one of the things you mentioned, Sal, which is that sub-study option. Maybe you have some of your sites, maybe it's 50%, 80% that have access to those MRIs, and you want that data that's unique. You could put that sub-study in and allow for those patients to be enrolled while not holding back your ability to find patients in other areas where that center, that MRI facility, or the costing for that is prohibitive. So, something that's kind of unique and creative that we've seen as solutions to try to incorporate maybe both, best of both worlds here, overall.
No, great points as we develop these different compounds. But I don't want to completely rule out MRI. We've certainly been using MRI in a lot of our MASH studies where we're looking at hepatic fat fraction, and so there is value to it. In the MASH studies, we're seeing reductions in hepatic weight, in hepatic fat, that proton density fat fraction. We've also seen in a lot of our neuromuscular, neurodegenerative studies, kind of evaluating the quality of that muscle. So it's not just the retention of the muscle, but are we improving that quality? And some of the things that we've done is we've looked at that fat quantification in the muscle itself using that same methodology as we did in the liver. Again, the other nice benefit of this is that you don't have the challenge of the size because you're only getting the lower extremities in there, but we can get additional data such as muscle volume, cross-sectional area, contractile area, as well as the intra and intermuscular fat fraction. So there is a role, again, in some of these sub-studies that we can consider that will help supplement some of the data that's out there and give us a better understanding of how we're impacting the patient down the line. Thanks.
Thank you, Sal, and thanks to Sal and Douglas for that deep dive into combination study design to address some of the lean mass preservation and also into those methods to really assess body composition. In addition to looking at those types of studies, we also want to talk a little bit today about switch design studies and how those can be utilized. We most commonly see this kind of switch design utilizing GLP-1 as the baseline therapy, but we did just want to review briefly what we mean when we talk about a switch design. So the basic concept of a switch design is shown in the figure on this slide. So typically we would start with eligible participants who are on a stable prior therapy, and most commonly, as I mentioned, what we see in this population is a GLP-1 based therapy. And then participants are randomized either to continue on that therapy or switch on to the investigational product or additional therapy. And then we follow them for that treatment and follow-up period to see what the effect is of either maintaining their original therapy or switching to the new investigational product. So we do find that this type of design has in the past been successfully used in type 2 diabetes to compare different therapies. And we do see that this type of switch design is helpful as a given indication and a given market matures and we have an evolving patient population where there is kind of an established therapy that many people are utilizing. So why would we do this type of study in obesity? I think there's really a variety of different ways that this kind of study design can be utilized to assess different aspects. And we've outlined some of those here. So this does allow us potentially to look at maintenance of weight loss, especially if we have longer duration of treatment. So do we get the same degree of maintenance of weight loss in people who continue on a GLP-1 based therapy versus potentially switching to other products? It also allows us to see if there's additional weight loss. So maybe patients have plateaued with their weight loss on a GLP-1 and switching to a different therapy might result in additional weight loss over time. These kind of studies also allow us to look at differences in safety and tolerability profiles with a direct comparison between the two. And then finally, we also have the opportunity to look at improvements in comorbidity and quality of life measures. And as we mentioned at the beginning, I think those aspects have become more important as we've been able to see subjects and patients achieving good weight loss with available products, but really looking at can we make additional improvements in their overall health status.
So, Philippa just kind of pointed out one of the reasons we're doing these things and the objectives that we're trying to look for in these different switch design, trials, but operationally kind of focusing on, how do you do that? How do you achieve those? And we've seen different strategies utilized. I think, 5 years ago, finding enough patients who were on stable GLP-1 based therapies to enroll and then switch over may have been a much more challenging goal. And as we see more and more patients being prescribed and sent those, achieving that stability, an option is that you bring those patients in with that background therapy already established and then switch them over, which, does have some limitations on the initial combinations of the IP that you can do to see, maybe you would have wanted to see if yours enhances that. So you wouldn't be able to see that in those instances. But you would be removing the need for that therapy run-in or the GLP-1 dose escalation. You would be getting rid of the tolerability factor from that. These patients would be coming in, already have improved that they can tolerate the GLP-1s. You can, that they've achieved the weight loss and it's okay. And then you could see and really study that maintenance. Maybe for a wealth of different reasons. Maybe you're looking at a cheaper therapy or something that's less, it's not a weekly regimen, maybe it's a different mechanism, it's an oral dose, something like that, where you think that there may be a benefit to the patient in the long run once they've achieved that stable weight loss, that initial weight loss from that first category that we talked about at the top of the slides. One of the retention challenges that's a bit unique with the switch design strategy, though, is that you're not just dealing with, the normal classic retention strategy challenges that we have, which is you bring these patients in, you have a placebo arm, you may not see weight loss. Well, in these cases, when you're looking more at the maintenance of weight loss, if you are switching those patients off of the GLP-1, you may have differing, specifically if you're adding, multiple arms, you may have differing amounts of effectiveness, and if there's any kind of weight rebound, that can be a big issue and something that you have to think about and be ready for and have processes in place within your trial design to make sure that you're not losing patients and then you can keep to your endpoints. And also, you see this being really utilized for maintaining that efficacy, not just cheaper or less frequent therapy, but maybe you're minimizing some of the tolerability or the side effects that the patients are okay with while they're losing weight, but maybe once they've hit their goals, their weight loss goals, they're not as interested in or keen in staying on. So that could be another area of kind of unmet need, or an area where you can improve that overall health status in that third bucket. And then finally, really challenging the status on behavioral modifications, or lifestyle maintenance, or bettering their comorbidities, the other pieces of the puzzle that is their their overall journey for health, and to try to make their overall sense of well-being better. So looking at ways and endpoints and measures to test not just how much weight they're losing, but the quality of weight that they're losing, and other physical attributes that could be interesting, and something that kind of pushes us forward.
Thanks, Andy. So we've certainly kind of covered a lot of information. The big topic has been weight loss, but I think as we start looking at some of the studies moving forward, and as we've seen from Douglas's presentation, there are other parameters that are of interest. So how do we implement a data stream that's easy from the patient's perspective and allows us to collect additional data in the patient's everyday life? So we're losing weight, but what does this mean in terms of what's going on? And so some of the things that we look at, functional assessments, actigraphy has become a huge benefit. Looking at physical overall steps, I know that's one of the main things that everybody's looking at. Did I get my 10,000 steps today? We looked at some of the more clinical type things like stair climbing and 6-minute walk tests. We're looking at muscle strengths with dynamometers, trying to assess not just is the lower extremity getting better, but is the upper extremity, as overall improvement in their quality of life is being impacted by these drugs and these studies. Looking at different gait and mobility issues, as I mentioned before, as some of us get older, we get joint replacements and things like that. Weight has a huge impact on that. So as we're losing that weight, are we able to demonstrate an improvement in our gait and our ability to get around? And then again, one of the big things that my wife will always complain about is my snoring, my sleeping. And so looking at, is my weight reduction helping improve my quality of sleep, looking at my O2 saturations and things like that on an ongoing basis. So lots of other data that we can easily collect and streamline that data stream into our overall data management aspects and final analysis of these studies. As we kind of look at some of these other things, you really have to look at where you are in your drug development, and certainly continuous glucose monitoring or just the routine finger sticks may be an important aspect as we're doing these switches, as we're looking at long-term. Are we reducing the amount of insulin that's going on? Also being able to quantify how much is there a reduction in their treatment that's being required of their insulin or something else. So we again can help support these types of things in the patients in a seamless fashion without interrupting their lifestyle, and yet being able to get quality data that will help us better understand what we're doing for these patients. As we again go into some of these newer combinations, cardiovascular events. I know that Douglas mentioned a couple of the study examples where cardiac endpoints were one of the considerations. So, in an early SAD-MAD study, we can do standard 12-lead ECGs. As we start getting these patients out, maybe getting Holters or patches that give us up to 2 weeks of data. And you can also add other sensors to that so that we can see actigraphy, temperature, O2 sensing, things like that. We may also want to see the result of this weight loss on their blood pressure, whether it's office-based blood pressure and the challenges of white coat syndrome in there. We can implement a strategy of using ambulatory blood pressure monitoring. So we see what happens with this patient when they're out in their real world as they're going through their day, as they're trying to get some sleep, and getting an assessment of whether or not their cardiovascular health is being implemented. And then kind of at the end, I think Douglas mentioned the REVA study looking at the heart failure patients. We also have other imaging modalities. It's not all about DEXA and MRI. but looking at perhaps cardiac echo, looking at cardiac MRI, either in a large group of the patients or maybe in a sub-study of these patients, and looking to see, are we improving heart function in these patients? And those of us that have been around for a while know that one of the earlier obesity drugs ended up being taken off the market because of a safety concern that was discovered and then was reported using cardiac echo in terms of their valve issues. So there's a lot to be done, not just weight, but also other assessments to determine whether or not we're really improving the quality of life for these patients in a lot of these different measures. So thanks, and I'm happy to move on to our other questions.
Thanks, Sal. I think that brings us really to the wrap up here. So we've talked through that first category or bucket on the left-hand side where we saw most of the activity, most of the space kind of focused on for quite some time, and then now that we've seen the emergence of these GLP-1 based therapies, we've really seen a change or a shift in strategy, and maybe using those as a standard therapy. And then where can we address these other three areas? Where can we help? Once they've achieved that initial weight loss goal, how can we help patients with their long-term maintenance of that weight loss? Is it incorporating, some kind of behavioral adaptation or something where you're adding on to that therapy, or you're replacing or switching that therapy? Those types of things have been really something that the industry in general has really been focusing on. And then to enhance that weight loss, we've gotten the overall weight loss down, but how can we make that more focused on fat loss and maybe less on muscle, and preserving that muscle to try to help with the other pieces, which is improving their overall health, making sure that they have the ability to do physical activity and to be fit and to kind of move those other things, those overall barometers for them, and really kind of enhance their lives. And so that has been a really big focus. And then of course the tolerability, the adverse events overall. How can you help? Maybe it's okay to have a little bit of tolerability at the front end, but once you've lost that weight, how do you keep the patients or keep your patients in that state so that there isn't that removal or they get tired of taking that and then they rebound. So what can we do to help minimize those overall adverse effects and really kind of move the industry forward as a whole? We're really excited to see all of the different creative strategies that have come through over the last 2 years or so to try to address these different categories. And we've been, seeing and discussing how do you measure that? What are the best ways to see how we can impact these pieces of the puzzle? And it's been a really exciting time and kind of age for weight loss management overall. We're excited to see what's new and what's coming up at Obesity Week that's coming up here on November 4th. So MedPace will be in attendance at the event. We will have a booth there at number 810. So we would love to hear if you're going to be there and you're going to be listening to what's happening next, what is the newest emerging strategies that maybe we haven't talked about yet that's on the horizon. We would love to talk to you and to chat more about that. So do stop by booth 810. With that, I think I can turn it over to Aisha for questions and answers.
Absolutely. Thank you very much to our very wonderful panelists for that very insightful, very interesting discussion. And so we do have a couple of more minutes before we wrap up the webinar. And I think we have a couple of questions. We have some questions from over here that we can get into for a quick Q&A. So let me quickly just go through what we can. So let's take a look at the first question we have here. So the question is, what could be the next advancement in the research space?
I think I can take this one. So, MedPace is, really, really excited to be in the obesity space. We've seen that huge surge in, obesity trials. But what we're seeing probably is a slight change in dynamics where, instead of running the general obesity trial between age 18 to 80, we're seeing more kind of specific trials in specific patient populations. So, that was very interesting from, really, similar to the Veru trial where they focus on patients above the age of 60. And that's one very good example. Or the Rivas trial where they focus on a very subset patient population. So my understanding is, what may be next in terms of the obesity space is kind of like very specialized focus in different areas. In different patient populations. So, obesity could be related to cardiac disease, also rheumatological diseases, respiratory diseases. So, different biopharma companies could be targeting the very specific indications. Another very interesting thing is like how statins evolved, basically was used, treating very specific conditions like myocardial infarction, angina. And then it was then rolled out as a kind of like preventative measure to prevent, these kind of events. So what we do think is that, over time, the obesity trials will evolve, and, it could be basically evolving to a state whereby, patients will be put on these kind of muscle preservation agents to prevent the occurrence of sarcopenia, basically. So it'd be very interesting running these kind of longer term trials to see, preservation of physical function, prevention of sarcopenia. And then the final step, I think, will be really in the particular patient population. So we're talking about sarcopenic obesity, whether or not these combination therapies can be used in, patients with, sarcopenic obesity successfully.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lee. And I think we can take one more question. This question is, do you see a preference between MRI and DEXA in the studies you currently run?
Maybe I can answer that one. I think the vast majority of the studies are looking at DEXA, sort of tried and true. We discussed during the presentation a couple of the advantages from a cost and availability. But certainly if there is something specific that you think your drug is doing, where, getting an MRI, looking at that muscle function, using MRI for cardiac in a sub-study is important. But I think for body composition, I think DEXA is fast, quick, easy, and relatively inexpensive, and gives reproducible results.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sabatino. And I think we can round out with one last question. This is, are you seeing more difficulty in finding subjects willing to participate with GLP-1 based therapy being more available now?
I guess I'll start with this one. I mean, I would say no. I think there's still plenty of patients who are available and willing to participate in obesity trials. But I do think we do have a more heterogeneous pool of patients. So we have some patients who've never used a GLP-1. There's probably less of those patients these days. But now we have different patients who've had prior use, who have current use, who maybe their prior use was stopped due to cost or logistics versus stopping use due to tolerability. So I do think we need to kind of be more precise as we're defining our patient populations and taking into account that more widespread use of GLP-1s and all the different ways in which people have used those, and then come into a trial with potentially that history of use and different components of that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Miranda, and thank you very much once again to all of our panelists today, again, for that very insightful presentation and for the Q&A. We have reached the end of the Q&A session and the webinar as well. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at MedPace may follow up with you, or if you have any additional questions, you may direct them to the email address displayed on your screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. The survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve our webinars. In addition, I am going to share a link to the recording of today's event in the chat box, and there it is. which you can share with your colleagues as well, so that when they register for the event, they can view the recording of today's webinar there. So I do encourage you to do so. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com to register for this event and gain access to features such as viewing the recording and a lot more. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers for their time here once again. We hope you found this webinar informative. On behalf of the team here at XTalks, thank you very much for attending, and we hope to see you at our future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.